Welcome to the HR Chat Show, one of the world's most downloaded and shared podcasts designed for HR pros, talent execs, tech enthusiasts, and business leaders. For hundreds more episodes and what's new in the world of work, subscribe to the show, follow us on social media, and visit HRgazette.com.
Hi, everybody. This is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of HR Chat. I want to thank my good friend Bill Banham, the editor of HR Gazette, for allowing me to guest host here for a few episodes. And with that, I'm really pleased to introduce today's guest. He's a friend, he's a collaborator, but most importantly, he is a world-known thought leader on the topic of resilience and burnout. And so with that, I'd like to welcome the founder and president of AG Thrive, Dr. Andy Garrett, where he coaches high-performing teams and organizations to enhance and sustain their performance without burning out. So with that, Andy, welcome.
Yeah, great to be here, Bob. Excited to have this chat with you.
No, awesome. Thank you. This HR chat with me. So real quick, where are you calling in from? Where are you based?
So I am in lovely Newport Beach, California.
Well, that sounds like
it's like 75 degrees. It is a gorgeous day here.
I'm sorry you're breaking up. I didn't catch all that, right? I've been out to your place. It is beautiful. So our topic today, Andy, at the risk of moving from silly to serious, is on burnout. And as we record this, the U.S. has just completed the presidential election and all the other elections. There's everything that's going on in the world with wars and uncertainty, economy. People have real lives that they're dealing with. They have their job that is a source of stress. People seem to be, and the data seems to suggest that a lot of people are kind of upset generally, and there's this sort of sense of disquiet, leading all the way to burnout. I was wondering if you could just, kind of get the table set for what some of the causes seem to be of burnout, and then thinking about it from both a personal but also professional perspective for organizations. What are some of the consequences of burnout?
Yeah. First off, just to give a context, I think of the scope of this problem. I've seen the numbers actually more recently being anywhere from 50 to 60% of employees are either currently acknowledging being burnt out or on the cusp of burnout. That's a massive issue in the workplace, right? And we know, I think the causes of that, we certainly, there's some sense of doing work that isn't meaningful, right? This notion of efficacy or effectiveness, when you feel like you're not being effective in the workplace, that seems to really, it's kind of slowly soul crushing without try not to be too, to exaggerate here. But when you know that you're doing something in an obligatory fashion, you're just kind of going through the motions, and you do that every day, it just starts to wear on you. I think there's also this notion of what we call allostatic load, and it's this idea of it's a buildup of stress, right? And so ideally, when we start to recognize that stress is accumulating, it's building up, as you said, there's multiple factors. People have financial concerns, relational concerns, health concerns, geopolitical, all these things. And then in the workplace, they got these demands that they have to meet. The buildup of that starts to have kind of a compound cumulative effect. Ideally, you recognize that. There's signals in your body, there's signals that you'll experience, and you take time to go and take a walk, do exercise, meditate, whatever it is. And hopefully you work in a office or in a company that supports actions like that. We call active recovery. But unfortunately, for most people, they don't stop. Those signs or signals come, but I got a deadline. I've got 6 other things that I need to get done. And so there's this notion, I just got to keep pushing through, and I got to push, and I got to keep, going. And unfortunately, the effect of that is that allostatic load, eventually you kind of bust through, and that's where you end up having stress-related illness and injuries, and ultimately burnout. I do think that if you look at the kind of spectrum or the movement towards burnout, I think one of the first signs or symptoms that you will see in employees is disengagement. You'll start to notice that they are someone maybe that's very effective, very talented at what they do, but they're starting to lose that sense of enthusiasm. You can often see the stress. Yeah. And so you notice that they're kind of checked out. That's, I think, the first sign. And if you don't intervene at that point, eventually it will lead to burnout. Mm-hmm. So the consequences for that are significant. So there's the mental health consequences of someone that like I said, can lead to stress-related illness or injury. Certainly, diagnoses are going up related to anxiety disorders, adjustment disorders. I mean, there's all kinds of. We know the amount of money that's being spent right now on mental wellness programs, even in prescribing medications and doing different interventions is massive. So there's certainly a recognition that this is a major problem. It's a major drain on the company. Obviously we care about the individual that's experiencing burnout, but it affects the entire system. When you start to see burnout, especially at that 50 to 60% rate, I think I've seen burnout as something like a $200 billion a year problem for companies in the US with a loss of performance and productivity. So it's a major problem. And of course, these problems don't get isolated to the workspace. They get carried out into home. And so you start to see then the effect that has, maybe on a marriage, maybe on a family, certainly on their health. I mean, you see with burnout, you lose that to make really good decisions often requires a certain degree of willpower, right? The ability to not just do the easy thing or to do the immediate gratification. And when people are burnt out, they don't have the bandwidth. And so you see this kind of slow degrade into them getting into worse and worse shape mentally, physically, socially. I think you certainly see a lot of isolation. When people need to reach out the most, when they're stressed out, unfortunately, oftentimes the thing is, I just need to figure this out on my own, or, a series of behaviors. So can lead to depression, certainly a feeling that there's a notion of what we call learned helplessness. And that's that notion when you feel like I'm trying things, but because of often things I have no control over, maybe a workplace, a manager that's really demanding and, telling me I've got 10 more projects that I've got to, make progress on, that eventually you start to feel powerless and helpless. And we know that that's really the precursor to depression. And so all these things are related to burnout, which has a major impact, again, on the individual experiencing it and their well-being in life, but also on the well-being of the company.
Yeah, and such a great kind of overview that you just provided. I just want to make a couple more points because we have an HR-specific audience here. Right.
Yeah.
We talk about bringing your whole self to work, and kind of unfortunately, people do bring their whole selves to work. And you alluded to some of these, but whether it's aging parents, my significant other relationship, my personal health, my financial situation, my kids, just like all these things that are kind of at home, personal things, right? Those do come to work with us.
That's right.
We talked about kind of, the kind of environmental things, of whether it's, politics or the economy and all those sorts of things. They have me, wrapped around the axle and worried and fretful. And then there's the actual work itself that I'm responsible for. And let's say I work at a company that's been through a layoff, and now I'm backfilling, what a couple other people were doing. Now that's landed on my desk, or now I've got management responsibilities that maybe I didn't sign up for, right? So like any and all of this, you talk about the cumulative effect, because I can't use the fancy words you use, but the cumulative effect of all of that is real. And then from we talk about engagement, but there's also attrition, right? I just can't do this anymore. There's lack of innovation because we lose our creativity, because to your earlier point, we've lost bandwidth, right? I'm already tapped out. I have nothing left. I think, we both are friends and fans of Johnny Taylor at SHRM, where they're talking about civility and having civil conversations. Maybe I'm just a little bit testier at work. Maybe something sets me off a little bit more easily because I already showed up to work exhausted. Right. And so now something kind of doesn't go the way that I thought it should go. And like I have an out of pattern reaction. Like that doesn't sound like Andy. Like, so, it's real. And it's more than just kind of feel good, be nice. That I want to kind of start to lead us here, because I want to get to the solution in a second. What we're talking about isn't lost on our audience. I think that you do a great job of dimensionalizing this a bit more and helping folks understand that, this whole person kind of a thing is what's coming to your office, and it does have consequences. So HR people, they care about their folks. They're trying to put together benefits that address these things. And maybe if you could kind of acknowledge, yes, we're doing some of that, things that look like X, Y, and Z, but then maybe what's working and what could be improved.
Yeah. Well, there certainly seems to be a recognition of companies the need to invest in wellness programs. So I think it's an obvious issue at this point. And I believe it's in 2026 that they're projected to spend $96 billion on various wellness programs. And so I certainly want to applaud, right, this kind of increased investment.
Yes.
Unfortunately, what we're seeing as the money's going up and the investment's increasing, we're not necessarily seeing a correlation in that with the well-being. We're not seeing the well-being and the culture of companies, the issues of burnout, disengagement, the absenteeism, all these things that are a byproduct of a declining mental health or well-being in a company or within individuals. We're not seeing that go up in correlation. And in fact, in some regards, the problem's getting even slightly worse. And so we're looking at some of the interventions, and while there are, I think, some wonderful apps out there, I'm aware of some. There is programs like EAPs, things that I think are well intentioned, but if you look at the actual engagement rates on these interventions, they're extremely low. And I'm hearing this with some of the companies that I'm working with, engaging with, that paid a lot of money to get these great apps, but when they look at the actual amount of times that employees are using it, the numbers are extremely low. I think the problem with some of those interventions also is that the engagement is focusing on the individual, but it's not really addressing the culture of the company, right? It's not necessarily even addressing leadership or managers. I think, we both heard the statistic that the manager that someone works for can have a bigger impact or the same impact on someone's quality of life that they manage as the person's spouse. That's a massive impact, right? When I've heard that, and I've worked with people that nod their head.
Dude, I've lived that. I'll attest to what you just said.
Yeah. And so if we're not going in and we're not equipping leaders and managers to be, ideally with resilient strategies, or, we talk a lot about true north, so that they're able to really know what brings out their very best, to do work in a way that's connected to their core values, that feels purposeful, that's guided by their character strengths and helps to bring out, their very best work. Suddenly then that leader, and especially when they have the resilient strategies, leadership strategies, they are better equipped to deal with adversity. So, when tough times come, they're not just responding by yelling or taking it out or giving the example or lead that, hey, we're not in good shape. Everybody else should probably fend for themselves right now. Instead, when someone's able to really anchor back to their true north, focus on their resilient strategies, it's amazing how the rest of the team also starts to kind of, feel, hey, we've got this. I think of it like a quarterback, that in the 2-minute, drill where the game's on the line and the pressure's at the highest. Those quarterbacks that are able to get the cool, calm, collected and really get the rest of the team also to focus, those are the ones that win the Super Bowl titles. That's what we want to equip people to do, is to know how, when the pressure gets highest, that they're able to use strategies and tools that programs have hopefully given them to be able to lead their team into more resilient responses.
Okay, let's slow down for a second. So you're using a couple of terms that I want to make sure that people understand. So true north and even values, I mean, just like in the simplest language and maybe with some examples, what does that mean? Yeah.
So we know, interesting, there's and I'll make sure this connects to what I just said. But a Gallup poll just sent out, it was research looking at when employees felt connected to the culture of their company, right? Culture is really like another word for kind of the identity of the company. It's not just the reputation. It's not the commercials you see on TV. It's what that actually you experience in the company. What's the character? What values do they actually represent? Not the ones that sit on the walls, but how does leader actually, the decisions they make, what they actually prioritize. And so when people felt connected to that, it increased engagement by nearly 400%. It had decreased the probability of burnout by almost 70% and decreased their likelihood of looking for new jobs by 42%.
Wow.
That's a massive impact. And a lot of that is related to when you've got a culture of a company that clearly has a strong sense of culture and identity, ideally anchored to their core values. So core values just represent what is most important to you. It's the things that you stand for, the things you most identify with. And when you feel connected to them, as an individual, the research shows you feel like you can overcome just about anything, right? That ability when stress comes and things get chaotic, to really being able to bring order to chaos, because you say, well, what really matters here? And, if you're able to focus in, well, integrity, that's what really matters to me. Or, whatever those core values might be. When you start heading in that direction, again, what we call true north, it's amazing how it gives clarity. It gives the ability to make higher level decisions because you know what direction to head in. It gives you the basis to act with conviction and confidence, and to have consistency and cohesiveness in how you act. And so those core values really, to me, are a complete game changer when you help the individuals to define what those are for them in the workplace and how that relates to the work they do. And that also makes the work much more meaningful. They start to feel connected to that work in a different way. And when you have a clear understanding what the values of the workplace are, and ideally there's alignment between the two. When you just create that alone between the employee and the workplace, that has a massive mitigating factor against burnout.
Okay, so I want to go super, super slow because you and I talk about this stuff regularly, and these could potentially be very new concepts for some listeners. When you say integrity, nobody's not for integrity. I mean, right? I mean, nobody admit to themselves, I'm not for integrity. Somehow I've rationalized that whatever my behavior is, I'm still acting with integrity, right? So what are examples, and maybe I'll give a couple that might not even be right, but you might value relationships. I might value results. Okay, those are equally valid things to value, right? But they're different, right? I might value, let's get done what we can do today. That might be viewed as a short-term mentality. And you might be like, no, like we need to be building for the longer term. Like, we always need to kind of have, the future in focus here. And so, or I'm really about family. Okay, who's not for family? But that can mean different things. So family could be, for me, I want to spend as much time with my children as possible, with my significant other as possible. For somebody else who equally loud and proud says, I'm a family value person. But for me, that means I provide for my family. I want to make sure that they're never resource, in a resource poverty kind of a way, that they never feel need. And so the best thing I can do is make more money, create more assets so that they're always, quote, safe, right? Very different approaches to life, but both could, in theory, say I'm a very family-oriented person. So how would you run with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And part of what we see, because companies often spend a lot of time and a lot of money getting consultants to define their core value, their mission statement, their vision. And oftentimes the individuals that work for them, their core values don't exactly line up. Mm-hmm. And so that ability to create that alignment, that doesn't just happen automatically. It doesn't happen organically. It often requires kind of a strategy, an intentional process or framework. And so, what we walk people through is help them define their individual core values, but to make sure that when you use, if it's integrity or family, whatever it is, that you're able to actually really define what that specifically means to you, why it's important. And then I think one of the key parts, how does that relate to the work you do? And it's possible in that you say it doesn't, right? I mean, it is possible going through that process that someone realizes this is really a poor fit for me. What you do with that, I know we've had some CEOs that we've worked with that said we'd really love for employees to self-select, that if it's not a good fit, because we want to see them thrive, right? And so that they have the ability and we can support them, maybe in finding some place or a different role even in the workplace that really is a better fit. But if you are working in a place that's not a good fit for your values, the likelihood of burnout goes up exponentially, right? I mean, there's the likelihood that you're doing work and you might be really good at it, but you don't find it meaningful and you don't find it fulfilling, that will start to slowly eat away at you. So I think the significance of making this connection to the alignment is massive. I think that's where you really can address the disengagement issue, which if you can get an employee that's highly engaged, I think you're much less likely to see them burn out, and then you're less likely to see a lot of unnecessary turnover. But the ability to define what those values are. We've had a lot of people that have gone through. We usually work initially with the leadership teams, but in going through our core values exercise, one of the feedback we've often heard is, it's never dawned on me what's important to my team. I am trying to get them motivated based off what's important to me. And so a lot of times they'll even take that exercise and they'll go bring it to their team. And in doing that, suddenly they have a language now to be able to understand, what's important to Bob and Susie. And, when you can speak someone's values language, it's honestly one of the most intimate and authentic things that you can do as far as, creating trust and really seeing and validating someone. It's incredibly powerful.
I think, where you're getting to, at least as I'm listening to you, it's the difference between speaking to someone as a human being and as a work producing unit.
Well said. Yeah. Yes.
Because you're speaking to their heart, and what they're saying is genuinely important. One thing I want to ask you, can values be ethically neutral? What I mean by that, it's not a trick question. It's a genuine question, which is, again, for example, like with the family example, which I think is a very good and real potential one, is
for sure.
The person wants to be at every T-ball game, soccer game, parent-teacher conference, dinner, like all that's super important to me, versus somebody else who's like, I'm willing to travel a lot because, it allows me to generate the kind of income and build wealth that allows me to know that I can pay for college for my kids, that God forbid if something happens to me, they're all going to be okay, which are like, again, really admirable qualities.
Absolutely.
So is it possible that values are, in one sense, ethically neutral? There's not a good and a bad. It's just what's true for you.
Yeah. Yes. I would say where the ethics part, what motivates it can sometimes determine, right? Whether it's extrinsically motivated or intrinsically motivated, that's a whole nother discussion.
Okay.
What I found, in bringing up that example, I was talking with someone last year who is a world-renowned, sought-after speaker and spends a lot of the time on the road. He's got a family, he's got a wife and kids, and so just curious, how do you do that, and does this cause issues? He said that he had to sit down with his wife and really say, how many days a week do you need me at home, and what is okay? But it was this collaborative process where his wife's voice and her input mattered, and he took that into account and then created his schedule based off of what she needed from him. So the fact that they were able to do it, she had autonomy, he had autonomy. So I think, there's so many different ways to live out these values that they really can be ethically neutral. I think just that having a very authentic, intentional conversation, whether that's around family or whatever, we talk a lot about with work-life balance, instead work-life integration. That's just about idea of being very intentional in how you live your life. And so that ideally, if physical health is really important to you, that part of the way that you create your work schedule is allowing for space and time to work out. So you're creating a very well orchestrated schedule that takes into account all the things that are important and meaningful to you.
Okay, so we have about 8 minutes, and what I was hoping that we could do is using True North values as a foundation. Can you kind of take us up a level to how that starts to create resilient strategies, which is something that you addressed, to help us maybe do more than cope with the inevitable change, upsetness, all the things that get us kind of fired up and feeling stress. Can you start to move us into resilience a little bit, Andy?
Absolutely. Really our program's a two-tiered program. So it starts with the True North, right? We kind of covered really getting into and going deep into understanding what brings out your values, your purpose, your mission. Part of the reason why I want to talk about that and the way that leads to resilience is that when you feel connected to purpose, when you feel connected to your values, that naturally makes you a more resilient person, right? We know there's an abundance of research that supports this. Also, when you're being resilient, I don't want it to just be being resilient. If you're in a toxic work culture and we just want to increase your resilience, the idea is not just to be able to suffer more, right? It's to be resilient towards something better, right? That ideally the resilience helps you to rebound from a difficult day, a failure, a setback, a challenge, and that you're able to then course correct, be resilient back into a higher state. If you think about someone who we both have a great appreciation for, Viktor Frankl, right? He was able to access his higher self in one of the worst possible of environments. He was in a Nazi concentration camp. And so that ability to continue to access, well, he didn't use the term, his true north, but that's what kept pulling him up out of this terrible environment into this resilient response, was because he was able to access his higher self regardless of what happened to him. And we know that brings out a resilience that's really extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so in addition to that, then we also teach proven resilience strategies. So everything from how to increase a biology of resilience. So it's doing active recovery exercises, knowing how to match the breathing exercise to the specific type of stress that you're experiencing, knowing how to have a stress mindset where you're able to actually transform stress into a source of motivation and meaning. Like that's a game changer alone, right? The stress can actually be a source of motivation and health. The ability to have a growth mindset. We do an exercise called it's called a benefit finding exercise, but effectively, it's what turned, most people know about PTSD. Very few people know about post-traumatic growth. Why more people don't understand that trauma and difficulties can be a source of significant meaning and growth and purpose. That's something we try and educate. And there's a specific pathway that you can apply, right? Where the meaning you attach to difficulties suddenly becomes it creates a trajectory for those setbacks to make you stronger, better, wiser. And so when we apply these proven strategies, and then we're also able to anchor them to a person's core values, something that's so significant and important to them, it just amplifies the effect of the resilient strategies. And so it's the most powerful in the 20 years of having done this work, worked in private practice, worked with companies and executives. It's the most powerful combination when you put these two together that I've ever witnessed or observed.
So, and this is coming from a clinical psychologist. So what intrigues me, at least, about resilience, it's really a life skill, right?
Yeah.
This isn't just an at-work skill. This is a life skill, because the rate of change, the magnitude of change, the unpredictability of change, is today's the slowest day of the rest of our lives. And so it's just going to keep happening. And so either you kind of live in this sort of fear of like what's around the corner, what's the next thing that's going to happen, or it's like I'm getting stronger. And what used to freak me out, it's like, okay, like not a big deal. I can deal with that. I've dealt with it before. I have a strategy, as you say, like I know what to do. Let's take this down into bite-sized pieces. Let's kind of figure, is anybody going to die or not die? No death. Okay, good. Right. And so be able to just sort of walk yourself through. But a big piece of this is retraining your mind to how to slow down enough to not just be overwhelmed. Could you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. I was going to say, a term or a kind of a metaphor that we use is the difference between how cows and buffaloes respond to incoming storms.
Okay.
And so I figured we use this illustration. So for those that may not have heard this story, apparently when cows sense a storm's coming, their natural inclination is to start to run away from the storm. Because they're not the fleetest of hoof, the storm catches up to them, and in their desire to avoid, they end up spending the maximum amount of time in the storm. Buffaloes, on the other hand, first, they come together as a herd, right? Protect the weak, the vulnerable, the young, and they know their strength in numbers. So, and then they start heading directly into the storm. And because they do that, they experience more immediate discomfort. They also get through the storm in the most efficient way possible and spend the maximum amount of time in the good weather. That's really, and people often, when we hear this, they get all excited and riled up. I'm going to be a buffalo. But the key is knowing what makes you a buffalo, right? Being able to really give language, to have a specific set of strategies that's true to who you are. that's all. Because if you just start running into storms and you aren't really aware of what makes you resilient, then it's easy to become a bull in a china shop, right? And you're actually adding to the chaos. But we've seen this over and over where, employees, we had one employee, a manager who really had worked with this company for 20 years, loved working there, but he was really conflict avoidant. And he had a really difficult employee, and he had issues that he wasn't dealing with. Those started to fester, and it created an environment at his workplace that became pretty toxic. And so he was ready to quit. He'd worked his way for 20 years to this dream spot of the job. He was well equipped for it. But fortunately, the owner of this company said, we've invested in True North Radical Resilience. We at least just hang on and go through it and see if that helps. So we did the training, talked about the whole buffalo, what makes you a buffalo. Sure enough, about 2 months after the training, the owner gets a response that employee created something that created a bunch of chaos for everyone. He was expecting to get a phone call, a resignation call. This guy calls him up. And he says, "Do I need to be ready to replace you?" He says, "Absolutely not. I'm a buffalo. I just didn't know it." And so he handled it. He had to let the employee go, but he did it in a way that was consistent with his values, right? He felt really good about how he handled it. He let everybody else know there that he was no longer going to let those types of situations fester, that he was going to lean into. He was no longer avoidant. That store is hitting record sales and profits. It's the top store within the company. That same manager also has addressed problems with his health. He lost like 25 pounds. With his wife, they actually have made through. It's really that holistic sense because the strategies work, period. They work at home the same as they do in the workplace. Yep. And so it's a really neat thing. I think that's what you see when people are equipped, that they spend more time in that true north space, operating, in things that are really meaningful, feeling very purpose-driven, operating at their highest potential. And something really magical happens. Burnout can become very contagious, but so can someone who's operating in that space that's purpose-driven, resilient. It has this incredible effect on everybody around. And so we want to see more people, as buffaloes, maximizing the amount of time that they're growing, creating, and thriving.
Awesome. Andy, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. If people want to learn more about True North and radical resilience, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I think the best way right now would just be to send me an email. So that'd be Dr. Andy, DRANDY, at ag-thrive.com. Okay, so Dr. Andy at ag-thrive.com. Awesome.
Cool.
Yes.
Awesome. Andy, thank you so much. And listeners, thank you guys so much for taking a few minutes out. I hope you're learning, get a little bit closer to how to become more of the buffalo that's in you. And Andy, I appreciate all the wisdom that you share with us. So thank you.
Yeah, this was, as always, super fun, Bob. I always love having these conversations with you.
Thank you, Andy.
This episode of the HRchat podcast is supported by Deal. Are you looking for an all-in-one solution to manage your global workforce? With Deal, you can easily onboard global employees, streamline payroll processes, and ensure local compliance, all in one flexible, scalable platform. Join thousands of companies who trust Deal with their global HR needs. Visit Deal.com today, that's DEEL.com, to see how you can start managing your global team with unmatched speed, flexibility, and compliance. Thanks, and we hope you enjoy this HRchat episode. This episode of the HRchat podcast is supported by Deal. Are you looking for an all-in-one solution to manage your global workforce? With Deal, you can easily onboard global employees, streamline payroll processes, and ensure local compliance, all in one flexible, scalable platform. Join thousands of companies who trust Deal with their global HR needs. Visit Deal.com today, that's DEEL.com, to see how you can start managing your global team with unmatched speed, flexibility, and compliance. Thanks, and we hope you enjoy this HRchat episode.